My brother invited me to his engagement dinner, but only if I arrived as someone he could be seen with. Not his brother, not family. Either staff, he said with a nervous laugh, or a family friend if that sounded less strange. I remember staring at my phone so long that the screen went dark in my hand. Then my face appeared in the reflection. Small, distorted, silent. That was the first moment I understood this dinner was not really a dinner at all. It was a test, not for me, for him, and I was the part of his life he needed hidden to pass. He called late in the evening, when people usually confess things they are ashamed to say in daylight. His voice was low, careful, dressed in fake calm. He kept pausing between sentences like he was stepping around broken glass. He said there would be important people there. He said the night meant everything. He said I had to understand how these circles worked. These circles. As if love had become a country club, as if blood needed clearance. He told me his fiancée's father would be hosting. That name alone was supposed to explain everything, and maybe for most people it would have. Half the city knew his face, the other half knew his voice. He was one of those television anchors people trusted without ever meeting. Smooth silver hair, perfect posture, a look that could turn concern into authority in seconds. Politicians smiled wider around him. Businessmen lowered their voices when he entered a room. Families ate dinner while he told them what mattered in the world. And now my brother wanted that man to approve of him. Not just approve, anoint him, accept him into a cleaner story. A story with polished shoes, neutral accents, softened histories, and no inconvenient relatives standing too close to the light. I should tell you now that my brother and I were not raised in the kind of house where people worried about optics. We were raised in the kind of house where a good week meant the electricity stayed on, and nobody asked to borrow money before Friday. We learned early how to stretch meals, how to keep old clothes looking decent, how to smile through embarrassment so strangers would not smell fear on us. We learned all of that together. That is what made his request feel less like an insult and more like an execution. Because when someone who barely knows you is ashamed of you, it hurts. But when it comes from the person who survived your childhood with you, it lands somewhere deeper, somewhere hard to name. He kept talking, trying to make it sound temporary, strategic, harmless. Just one night, he said, just until everyone gets comfortable, just until the engagement settles, just until her father sees I fit into their world. I noticed he never said ours. I asked him what exactly. He wanted me to say if anyone asked how we knew each other. There was a long pause, long enough for honesty to walk into the room and leave again. Then he said maybe I could say we grew up near each other. Maybe I had helped with some event work before. Maybe I was just close to the family. Close to the family. I nearly laughed when he said it, because what is closer than a brother? What is farther than being told to pretend you are not one? The strangest part was not the humiliation. It was how rehearsed he sounded, as if this conversation had already happened in his mind 10 times, as if he had chosen every word to make betrayal sound reasonable. He was not angry, he was not cruel in the obvious way, he was frightened. Frightened of saying the wrong thing. Frightened of being seen as common. Frightened that the life he was reaching for could still be taken away if the wrong person noticed where he came from. And somehow, in that fear, I had become a risk. That was the wound. Not that he loved status. Not that he wanted to impress powerful people, but that in the moment he felt most desperate to rise, he looked at me and saw something to conceal. What happened after that call is the part nobody sees when they admire polished families and perfect engagements. Nobody sees the editing, the trimming, the private negotiations where one person decides another person is too real to be included. Nobody sees how class shame changes its clothes and starts calling itself strategy. Nobody sees how power works before it ever speaks loudly. It whispers first. It teaches people to hide their own blood. It teaches them that acceptance is worth almost anything, even betrayal. So when I tell you this story, I am not only telling you about a dinner. I am telling you about two brothers, one past, and the price of pretending that past never happened. I am telling you what image can do to love, what fear can do to loyalty, and what it feels like when someone who once stood beside you decides you belong behind the curtain. There was a time when my brother would have fought anyone who tried to make me feel small. Back then, we were just two boys from a narrow street with cracked sidewalks and windows that rattled in winter. The kind of neighborhood where everyone knew who was behind on rent, whose father drank too much, whose mother worked double shifts, and which kids learned too early how to lie and say they were fine. We did not have privacy. We had survival. We did not have elegance. We had routines built from necessity. Our mother kept old containers because buying new ones felt wasteful. Our father fixed broken things 3 times before admitting they were dead. The washing machine coughed like an old man for years. The stove needed a match on humid days. In summer, the house held heat like a grudge. In winter, we layered shirts and pretended we were not cold. But inside all that strain, my brother and I had each other. He was older by 3 years, which meant he became my shield before he was even old enough to understand what protection cost. If kids at school laughed at my worn shoes, he would say his were worse. If I forgot lunch, he split his in half before I had to ask. If some teacher used that soft voice reserved for poor children, the ones soaked in pity, he would glare so hard they would clear their throat and move on. I followed him everywhere. Not because he asked me to, because I trusted him the way children trust the sun to come up. We had our own language then. Shared looks across crowded rooms. Little signals for when adults were arguing and we needed to disappear. A certain knock on the bedroom wall that meant, "Are you awake?" Another that meant, "I know you heard that too." We learned how to read each other in silence. Hunger does that. So does shame. So does growing up in a house where money is always the loudest person in the room. When our parents fought about bills, we sat on the back steps and made promises boys should never have to make. One day we said we would fix everything. One day mom would not cry over envelopes. One day dad would stop looking at the floor when the landlord came by. One day we would live in a place where nobody whispered when company came over. Those dreams belonged to both of us. That is important. Because what he became later was not born from nowhere. It was born there, in that house, in that heat, in those humiliations we swallowed together. People like to think ambition begins as confidence. Sometimes it begins as escape. Sometimes it begins in a classroom when another kid wrinkles his nose at your thrift store jacket. Sometimes it begins when a friend's mother opens her pantry and you realize rich people do not count slices of bread. Sometimes it begins when you hear your own address spoken out loud and suddenly understand it sounds like a warning. My brother felt all of that more sharply than I did. Even as kids, I could see it. He noticed brands, he noticed accents. He noticed who got invited where and why. If a classmate's parents drove a nicer car, he remembered. If someone mocked our neighborhood, he remembered that too. He carried every slight like evidence. I carried mine like weather. I hated the humiliation, but I learned to live around it. He wanted to outrun it. That difference grew with us. By the time we were old enough to work, we were already making choices that shaped everything after. I took the practical path. Stable hours, predictable pay, work that was honest, useful, and never glamorous. I told myself security mattered more than image. Maybe that was wisdom. Maybe it was fear dressed as maturity. Either way, I chose the ground. My brother chose the latter. He studied harder, spoke smoother, trained himself to move through rooms with less of our neighborhood on him. He watched people, copied them, refined himself. Rough corners went first. Then the slang. Then the easy laughter, then the stories. He built himself carefully like someone renovating a house while pretending the foundation was not cracked, and I helped him do it. That is the part that stings now. When tuition came short one semester, I covered what I could and told him not to pay me back soon. When our father got sick, I took extra shifts so my brother could keep an internship that paid almost nothing but opened doors. When our mother needed rides to appointments, I handled them because his networking dinner was too important to miss. I told myself it made sense. He had momentum. He had promise. If one of us could climb higher, maybe both of us would breathe easier one day. I never called it sacrifice then. That word sounds too noble. It was just what brothers did. At least, what I thought brothers did. So when people later praised his polish, his discipline, his rise, I nodded and felt proud. I watched him enter rooms that once would have swallowed us whole. I listened as his voice changed on phone calls. More measured, more careful, more expensive somehow. I saw the better suits, the better apartment, the better circle. And beneath that pride, something else began to flicker, distance. Nothing dramatic at first, just edits. He corrected old stories. He shortened family details. He spoke about home as if it had been a useful inconvenience. And each time he moved a little further from where we started, I reminded myself this was still my brother. The boy on the back steps. The one who split his lunch in half. I did not realize then that while I had been helping him rise, he had also been learning what parts of his life could be left behind. And one of those parts, eventually, was me. I first met his fiancée in a restaurant so quiet it made me sit straighter. Everything about her looked deliberate, her posture, her smile, even the way she set down her glass seemed practiced, as if she had spent years learning how to take up space without ever appearing to try. She was beautiful, yes, but not in a soft or careless way. She looked finished, polished at the edges, like someone who had been raised to believe that first impressions were not accidents but investments. At first, I did not dislike her. That matters, because it would be easy to turn her into a villain and leave it there. But the truth is more uncomfortable than that. She was not openly cruel. She was warm in the way accomplished people often are. Interested, attentive, perfectly pleasant. She asked me about work. She remembered details. She laughed at the right moments. If there was judgment in her, it arrived dressed as curiosity. Still, I noticed things. She asked where we grew up, but not casually. She asked it the way some people inspect labels. When I answered, her expression held for half a second too long. Not disgust, calculation. She knew the area. Everyone did. It was the kind of place people referenced when they wanted to sound grateful they had made it out of somewhere harder. My brother jumped in almost immediately, smoothing the moment over. He said we had not really been there long. He said our parents always valued education. He said it with a smile, but his shoulders were tight. That was the first time I heard him revise us in real time. After that, the changes came faster. Once they got engaged, it was as if my brother had accepted a role and begun rehearsing for it full time. His clothes sharpened first. The old practical jackets disappeared. The scuffed shoes were replaced with leather that looked too expensive to walk in. Then his speech changed again. The neighborhood dropped from his vowels. His humor became cleaner, safer, less likely to reveal where it had been raised. Even his silences changed. He stopped pausing to think and started pausing for effect. He was not just becoming successful, he was becoming legible to people who valued polish over history. Family gatherings started to feel strange after that. He still came, but never fully. His body would be in the room, yet his attention stayed somewhere else, as if he were already translating us into a version he could report back later. He winced when our uncle got loud. He redirected our mother when she started telling stories from childhood. He laughed too quickly at things that embarrassed him, and not enough at things that once would have had him bent over the table. At first, I told myself this was normal. People grow, people change, people adapt to the worlds they move through. Then the edits became impossible to ignore. He stopped mentioning certain relatives entirely. A cousin with a drinking problem vanished from conversation. Our father's years of unstable work became a family business phase. Our mother's cleaning jobs became private household management, which sounded so polished it nearly made me angry. Our hometown stories, the ones with buses missed in rainstorms and birthday cakes made from whatever was in the pantry, started disappearing. Whenever they surfaced, he would flatten them into something harmless and quaint. Not true, quaint, as if hardship became acceptable only after it was decorated. I saw it most clearly one afternoon at a cafe, when his fiancée asked how we used to celebrate holidays. It should have been an easy question. Instead, my brother answered before I could. He described intimate dinners, simple traditions, close family time, all technically true, but not the whole truth. He left out the borrowed chairs, the extension cord running from the neighbor's apartment one December, the year our mother wrapped second-hand books in newspaper because proper gift wrap cost too much. He left out the ingenuity, the fear, the pride. He left out the parts that sounded poor. His fiancée listened with a slight smile, not mocking, assessing. She came from a world where image was not a side effect of life but one of its main currencies. You could feel it in the way she spoke about schools, neighborhoods, vacations, and family friends. Everything had ranking. Everything had meaning beyond itself. A dinner was never just dinner. A name was never just a name. Even affection seemed shaped by usefulness. And hanging over all of it was her father. Not just wealthy, not just connected, recognizable. The kind of man strangers trusted because they had watched him speak into cameras for years. His face entered homes every evening carrying certainty. He was one of the country's most respected television anchors, the polished center of national conversations. He interviewed ministers, challenged CEOs, moderated debates, and moved through charity galas with the same steady smile he used on air. People quoted him at dinner tables. Politicians courted his approval. His opinions did not simply reflect public mood, they helped shape it. My brother did not say his name lightly. When he did, his whole demeanor shifted. More careful, more eager, more afraid. That was when I understood the engagement had not simply introduced a woman into his life. It had introduced a hierarchy, a new gravity, a set of invisible rules. Her family did not need to insult us directly. Their world did something subtler. It taught my brother to pre-edit himself before they ever had to ask. And once a man starts trimming his own history to fit a room, it does not take long before he starts trimming the people in it too. The time I finally met him, I already knew his face better than I knew some relatives. That is what television does. It creates a strange intimacy without permission. You watch a man in your living room for years, and eventually his expressions begin to feel familiar. His concern feels measured but comforting. His outrage feels intelligent. His pauses feel important. He becomes less like a broadcaster and more like a national relative, the calm uncle of public crisis. The man trusted to tell people what was happening and what it meant. My brother's future father-in-law had built that kind of trust. He was not flashy. That would have been easier to dismiss. His power was quieter than that. He had the composed authority of someone who never needed to announce his importance because the room adjusted itself around him before he spoke. On television, he was elegant and restrained. He asked hard questions with a soft voice. He held eye contact, just long enough to seem sincere. He was the kind of man viewers described as solid, principled, reassuring. Off camera, I would learn he was something else too, not louder, just colder. His reputation stretched far beyond the newsroom. Producers wanted his approval. Editors feared his disapproval. Young journalists built careers hoping he might mention their names in the right room. He sat on advisory boards, charity committees, media panels, and private guest lists where influence was traded more carefully than money. He knew politicians, judges, executives, cultural donors, school trustees, and people whose names never appeared publicly but somehow controlled entire conversations. He was not merely well-connected. He was a gatekeeper. The kind of man who could make a mediocre person seem respectable just by being photographed beside them. The kind of man who could freeze someone out without ever raising his voice. A recommendation from him could open a door that had stayed locked for years. A withheld invitation could tell an entire social circle that someone was not yet fit to enter. My brother understood that better than anyone. Maybe too well. Every time he talked about the man, some part of him tightened. He would pretend admiration, but fear kept leaking through the seams. He admired his discipline, his poise, his standards. What he really admired was the protection that came with belonging to that orbit. To be accepted by a man like that was not just personal. It was symbolic. It meant you had been vetted. It meant your roughness had been approved into refinement. It meant your old life no longer had final authority over your new one. For someone like my brother, that kind of blessing must have looked like salvation. I could see it in the way he prepared for even small encounters. He checked his wording in texts. He rehearsed anecdotes. He researched wines he did not even like. He switched watches before lunches. He once asked me if our father had ever mentioned a second cousin who had served time, and when I said yes, he told me not to bring him up around certain people. Certain people, that was how it started. Then it became other things too. Do not mention the old neighborhood. Do not joke the way we used to. Do not tell the story about the leaking roof. Do not talk about Dad's layoffs. Do not make him look like he came from struggle, as if struggle were a stain that spread if named out loud. The more I heard, the clearer the pattern became. This man, the great anchor, did not simply value achievement. He valued presentation. He understood what many powerful people understand better than anyone. The public rarely judges a person directly. It judges symbols, families, associations, the shape of a table, the quality of speech. The invisible message sent by who is welcomed and who is quietly kept at the edge. Image, in his world, was not vanity. It was strategy. And strategy was moralized until it looked like taste. That was what made him dangerous. Not because he barked orders or openly insulted people. Men like that are easy to identify. He worked in subtler ways. A small pause before a reply. A glance that made someone explain themselves more than necessary. A compliment that also placed a person in a category. Publicly, he was all grace. Privately, he managed atmosphere with surgical precision. People wanted his approval because he made acceptance feel like proof of worth. I think my brother mistook that for love, or maybe he did not mistake it at all. Maybe he simply knew that in certain worlds, affection follows obedience. When the engagement dinner was announced, everyone treated it like a celebration. A beautiful evening, families meeting properly. Blessings, formalities, the next chapter. But the way my brother spoke about it told a different story. He did not sound excited. He sounded hunted. Every detail mattered too much. Seating, timing, introductions, wardrobe, topics, names, who would be there, what they did, what they knew, what they must never know. That is when I understood the dinner was not designed to welcome people. It was designed to assess them. Every smile would be weighed. Every sentence would be sorted. Every background would be measured for usefulness or risk. And in that house, at that table, under the shadow of a man who made a living shaping what the public believed, truth itself would have to dress carefully just to be allowed in. The call came 2 nights before the dinner, just after 10. I remember the time because I had already changed into old clothes and was washing a plate in the sink when my phone lit up with his name. For a second, I smiled. Late calls from him were rare then, and some foolish part of me thought maybe this was the version of him I missed. The one who called without agenda. The one who still sounded like home. I answered with that hope still alive. By the time he hung up, it was gone. He did not ease into it. That almost would have been kinder. He asked if I was still free for Thursday. I said yes. Then he exhaled in that careful way people do when they are about to betray you but want credit for struggling with it. He said he wanted me there. He said it mattered to him. Then his voice lowered and everything changed. There were a few things we needed to be smart about. Smart. That word still bothers me. I asked what he meant, already feeling my stomach tighten. He told me the dinner was formal. Her father was particular. Some of the guests would be people from media, law, finance. People who noticed things, people who remembered details. He said the atmosphere would be sensitive and that first impressions would shape a lot going forward. Then he said, very softly, that it might be better if we did not lead with the fact that we were brothers. Not lead with it. That was his phrase. As if kinship were just a clumsy talking point. I thought I had misheard him. I actually asked him to repeat himself. There was a pause. Then he said it more clearly this time. For one night, he said, it would help if I came as a family friend. Or if the staff structure needed another pair of hands and I did not mind blending in, something closer to event support. He said it lightly, almost joking, as though the absurdity might become harmless if delivered with enough nervous charm. I did not say anything. The silence on my end stretched so long that he rushed to fill it. He said it was not personal. He said it was about timing. He said her father had certain expectations and that once things were settled, none of this would matter. He said they had worked hard to keep the evening elegant and uncomplicated. He said our family dynamic was difficult to explain to people who did not understand where we came from. He said old stories could create the wrong impression. He said there would be time later for honesty, just not now, not at the beginning, not when so much was at stake. Then came the details. Do not mention growing up together. Do not call him by the nickname I had used since childhood. If someone asked how we knew each other, say we had been close for years through family connections. Avoid stories about our parents. Avoid stories about the neighborhood. Avoid anything that made the past feel chaotic or unstable. Keep things light. Keep things vague. Do not volunteer too much. I remember gripping the edge of the sink until my fingers hurt. He was not asking me to be quiet. He was asking me to assist in rewriting him. I finally asked the question that had started burning in my chest the moment he first said family friend. I asked him if his fiancée knew who I was. He hesitated, and in that hesitation I heard everything. Not the full lie, maybe, but enough of an edit to make the truth inconvenient. He said she knew I was close to the family. He said she knew I had always been around. He said he had not wanted to overcomplicate things early on. He said introductions had happened in stages. He said once people got comfortable, he would explain properly, as if my existence needed scheduling. I asked him whether he could hear himself. That was when his voice changed. Less polished, more desperate. He said I was making it bigger than it was. He said people in certain environments made strategic choices all the time. He said this was one night only. One dinner. One temporary adjustment to protect something important. He reminded me how much pressure he was under, how hard he had worked, how much this marriage could change for him. Then, almost in a whisper, he said he needed me not to ruin this. Ruin this, there it was, not support him, not understand him, not forgive him, disappear correctly, that was what he needed. In that moment the humiliation arrived in layers. First came disbelief, clean and bright, then anger, then something quieter and worse. A grief so specific I could barely name it, because this was not the pain of being left off a guest list. It was not even the pain of being judged by strangers. It was the pain of hearing my own brother speak as if the truth of me threatened the future he wanted. I had spent years helping him build that future. I had defended him when others called him arrogant. I had covered for him when family said he was changing. I had told myself distance was the tax success collected. But now he was asking for more than distance. He was asking for erasure. He was asking me to stand in the room as a witness to my own removal and call it love. When he finally stopped talking, I could hear him breathing. Waiting. Afraid, I think, that I would refuse. Afraid maybe that I would say the one thing he could not manage around those people. The truth. Instead, I stood there with the kitchen light humming above me, water still running cold over my knuckles, and understood that some betrayals do not arrive with shouting. They arrive softly. Carefully. In the voice of someone you love, asking you to become less so they can become more. I wish I could tell you I hung up and refused. I wish I could tell you pride arrived like a clean blade and cut the whole thing loose. That I laughed at the audacity, blocked his number, and protected whatever dignity he had tried to bargain away. That would make for a neater story. Stronger, maybe. Easier to admire, but that is not what happened. What happened was more human than heroic. I said yes. Not right away. I made him wait. I let the silence sit there between us until he started filling it with clumsy explanations again. Then I told him I needed to think. I ended the call. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after, listening to the tap run and run as if the room itself had forgotten how to stop. I should have been furious. I was. But beneath the anger sat something older and more dangerous. Attachment. People who grow up scraping by learn strange habits of endurance. You get used to swallowing what should be rejected. You tell yourself peace matters more than pride because conflict costs too much. You excuse the insulting tone because rent is due, because your mother is tired, because everyone is already carrying enough. You become skilled at making room for other people's discomfort while shrinking your own. It does not feel noble when you are doing it. It feels practical. Then one day you realize practicality has taught you to survive disrespect without naming it. I think that is part of why I did not refuse him. The other part was simpler. He was still my brother, not the polished version, not the frightened man who had called me with conditions, the older brother who split sandwiches in half, the boy who stood between me and the world when both of us were too small to matter much. Loving someone does not vanish the moment they fail you. Sometimes that is the problem. Sometimes love lingers after dignity starts packing its bags. So I told myself, I was going for reasons that sounded wiser than heartbreak. I told myself I wanted to see for myself who these people really were. Not the public version, the private one. I wanted to understand what kind of family made my brother feel he had to carve pieces off himself just to be acceptable. I wanted to meet the fiancée without the filters he used when describing her. I wanted to see the famous father in his own house, among his own people, where cameras were absent and control would show itself differently. And yes, part of me wanted to protect my brother, even after that call. That is the embarrassing truth. I had a feeling the dinner would be dangerous, though not in the dramatic way. Dangerous in the way elegant rooms can be when everyone is performing and one mistake can be turned into a verdict. I knew my brother would be tense, overmanaged, desperate to please. I knew desperate people make bad decisions. Some part of me believed that if I was there, even hidden, I could somehow keep things from going completely wrong. Maybe I could absorb a little of the pressure. Maybe I could witness what he could not admit. Maybe I could stop him from sinking deeper into whatever this was, or maybe I just was not ready to let him walk alone into a room that had already taught him to be ashamed of us. The next day, I sent him a message. I will come. He replied almost immediately, too quickly for someone trying not to seem relieved. Thank you, he wrote. Just keep it simple. It will only be for a few hours. He sent the address after that. Then, as if logistics could soften humiliation, he added a suggested dress code. Dark suit, no bright tie, conservative shoes. He also sent the cover story, family friend, known each other a long time, helped out during difficult periods, keep details general. I read that message so many times it stopped looking like language. Then I started preparing. Not because I wanted to impress them, because I refused to arrive looking as embarrassed as he wanted me to feel. I pulled my only 2 decent suits from the closet and hung them side by side. One was older but fit better. The other looked newer but never sat right across the shoulders. I tried them both on under weak bedroom light, checking myself in a mirror that caught every flaw without mercy. I chose the older one, better to be honest in fabric at least. I polished my shoes carefully, trimmed my nails, shaved slower than usual. Every small act felt ceremonial, but not in a proud way. More like armor being assembled by hand. Then came the rehearsal. How do you rehearse becoming less than you are? I practiced neutral answers in the mirror. How do you know him? We've been close for years. What does your family do? A little of everything. Where are you from? Nearby. I worked on my tone, trying to strip out anything too warm, too familiar, too revealing. I hated myself while doing it. Hated the caution. Hated the obedience in it. Hated that some part of me still wanted to make this easier for him. By the afternoon of the dinner, I had everything laid out on the bed. Suit, shoes, watch, phone, wallet. A face I barely recognized. And under all of it, something harder to prepare than clothes or lies. Control. Because I knew the real challenge would not be walking into that house. It would be standing in front of my own brother, hearing him call me anything but what I was, and keeping my expression steady long enough to see what happened next. The house stood at the end of a curved private drive, like it had been designed to make ordinary people lower their voices. Even before I stepped out of the car, I could feel the choreography of the place. The gates had opened without visible effort. The gravel was too clean. The hedges were clipped into shapes that looked effortless only because money had arranged them to be. Light spilled from tall windows in controlled golden squares, not warm enough to seem casual, just warm enough to suggest cultivated comfort. It was not a home in the way I understood homes. It was an argument, A statement made in stone, glass, and restraint. At the entrance, the front door stood already open, not invitingly, prepared. A woman in black greeted me with the kind of professionalism that gives nothing away. Her smile was exact. Her eyes flicked once to my shoes, my tie, my face, then returned to neutral. She took my coat before I fully answered her greeting. Somewhere deeper in the house, glasses touched softly. Cutlery chimed against china. A low current of conversation moved through the rooms like something rehearsed to sound effortless. Everything smelled expensive. Cedar, citrus polish, a trace of perfume in the air, something roasting slowly in another room. Beneath it all was the faint sterile scent of perfect surfaces, the kind that tells you no one really lives carelessly here. The foyer opened into a wide hall lined with photographs in dark frames. Award dinners, charity galas, handshakes with ministers, studio portraits in black and white. The anchor's face appeared again and again, aging elegantly through decades of public importance. In each image, he stood where the eye naturally settled. Even on the walls, he occupied the center. A second staff member passed carrying a tray of narrow glasses that caught the light like instruments. Not tumblers, not anything ordinary. Every object seemed chosen to whisper the same message. We know the rules here. And if you do not, we will notice. When I entered the main reception room, I understood immediately that this was not a dinner where people relaxed into themselves. It was a room built for being observed. Tall ceilings, art placed with intentional asymmetry, cream walls, dark wood. A piano no one was touching, but everyone was meant to admire. Fresh flowers arranged low enough not to block sightlines. Seating grouped to create small circles of conversation that could be entered or exited with strategic ease. Even the music, some soft instrumental thread in the background, seemed less like entertainment and more like atmospheric editing. Guests stood with drinks positioned carefully at chest height, as if they had all attended the same finishing school for posture and discretion. Men in dark suits with the confidence of people, accustomed to being deferred to. Women in silk and muted colors, elegant in a way that appeared unstudied, but certainly was not. I recognized a local judge from the paper, a media executive from billboards downtown, a columnist whose opinions could make restaurants famous or finished. Not celebrities exactly. More dangerous than that. People who moved reputation around behind the scenes. And then there were the greetings. Those told me more than anything else. Some guests were welcomed with warmth that bordered on affection. The anchor moved toward them personally, hand extended before they had fully crossed the room. Their jokes landed. Their names carried weight. Others were acknowledged with polished courtesy but left to settle themselves. A quick smile, a measured nod, a subtle filing away. You could see rank operating in real time if you watched closely enough. Who got ushered nearer to the center, who was introduced upward, who had to hover at the edge and earn their way inward. And me, I was not greeted as a guest. I was processed. The fiancée saw me first. Her expression shifted, just slightly, when recognition met uncertainty. My brother was at her side almost instantly, as if he had been waiting for that exact collision. He smiled too fast. His hand touched my elbow, not warmly but directing. He introduced me by first name only. A close family friend, he said. Someone who has known us a long time. The phrase landed in the room and stayed there, false but usable. He did not say brother. He did not even stand beside me long enough for familiarity to become visible. He peeled away almost immediately, drawn back toward the cluster around the anchor as if proximity itself could certify him. The distance was physical now, not just emotional. Across the room, he laughed too brightly at something someone said. He straightened his cuffs. He checked where his fiancée was standing. He made sure again and again that no accidental intimacy formed between us. No shared shorthand. No brotherly ease. Every movement of his body said the same thing. Do not make this harder for me. I took a glass from a passing tray, though I barely tasted what was in it. Dry, cold, sharp with citrus. My palm was damp against the stem. Somewhere nearby, someone discussed schools with the seriousness of geopolitics. At another cluster, a man was praising a documentary series the anchor had moderated. A woman in pearls glanced at me once, searching for context, then looked away when none was offered. That was the atmosphere of the house. Not hostile. Worse. Selective. You were welcomed only once your category had been assigned. As the room slowly filled and conversations braided together, one fact became impossible to ignore. This was not an engagement dinner in the sentimental sense. No one was here to celebrate love in its messy human form. They were here to witness compatibility. To inspect pedigree, tone, restraint, usefulness. The food, the lighting, the guest list, the pauses between introductions, all of it formed one elegant machine, and every person inside it was being measured. When we finally sat down, the room seemed to tighten around the table. It was long without being absurd, elegant without appearing to try. Candles burned low in heavy glass. Silver caught the light in thin, controlled flashes. Plates were spaced so precisely they looked measured. Place cards had been written by hand in a narrow, graceful script that somehow made everyone's name seem more important than it was. Mine sat near the far half of the table, not exactly hidden, but placed where people like me are often placed when a room wants options. Close enough to include, far enough to contain. The anchor sat at the head, of course, not because anyone announced it, but because the whole table had already decided. His fiancée sat near him on one side, my brother on the other. I was down the line with a corporate lawyer, a museum donor, and the wife of a cabinet minister whose smile never fully reached her eyes. Staff moved in and out almost soundlessly, setting down courses with the rhythm of a ritual. Then the conversation began, not naturally, strategically. The first questions were harmless on the surface. Work, weather, traffic, a recent cultural event someone had attended and others pretended to have opinions about. But very quickly, the table shifted into that polished kind of probing I had seen before in rooms where people think themselves too refined to interrogate directly. Nobody asked what class you came from. They asked where you went to school. Nobody asked how much money your family had. They asked what part of town you grew up in, then nodded in a way that translated the answer into figures. Nobody asked whether your upbringing embarrassed you. They listened to your accent and did the math themselves. The lawyer beside me asked what line of work I was in. His tone was pleasant. His eyes were not. I gave him the version I had prepared. Stable work. Operations. Practical responsibilities. Long hours. But I like structure. He smiled in a thin, approving way, the smile of a man who likes useful people as long as they remain useful and do not become too visible. Then he asked whether I had always been in the city. I said mostly. He asked where I studied. I told him enough to satisfy the question without inviting more. Every answer felt like walking through a room full of glass objects with my hands tied. Across from me, the anchor was running the evening with such grace that someone less alert might have mistaken it for kindness. He never dominated outright. He guided, redirected, opened doors for some guests and quietly shut them for others. If someone said something awkward, he rescued the room before discomfort fully formed. If someone drifted toward a subject he disliked, he smiled and introduced a better one. He had the on-air gift of making people feel heard while subtly reminding them who controlled the frame. That was his true talent. Not speaking. Framing. At one point, the cabinet minister's wife asked my brother where he had developed such discipline. It should have been a simple compliment. Instead, I watched my brother freeze for half a second before answering. He spoke about mentors, internships, professional environments that had shaped him. Not a word about our mother waking him before dawn so he could study before school. Not a word about the years he worked under fluorescent lights and came home too tired to eat properly. Not a word about the family that had held the edges while he climbed. I kept my face still. The fiancé noticed. That was the first time I saw real discomfort in her. Not social discomfort, moral discomfort. It flickered and vanished quickly, but it was there. She glanced from my brother to me, then to her father, as if hearing a note in the room she had not recognized before. Until then, I think she had treated the evening as a delicate social exercise. Now she was beginning to sense the cost of the arrangement. Human cost always changes the temperature, even in elegant rooms. The questions kept coming. Where had I met the family? How long had we known each other? Did I travel often? Had I always preferred practical work? There's a particular cruelty in polished curiosity. It smiles while cutting. It lets everyone pretend no blood was drawn. I answered carefully, feeling my own words flatten as they left me. A family connection. Many years, no, not much travel. Yes, I valued steady work. Each reply bought me safety and cost me something. The more controlled I sounded, the more unreal I became. The anchor finally addressed me directly. His voice was warm enough to be quoted. He said it was rare, these days, to find people who valued loyalty over self-promotion. He asked how I had come to know my brother so well. A simple question on paper. At the table, under his gaze, it landed like a blade laid gently against the throat. He held eye contact the way he must do with politicians when inviting them to incriminate themselves politely. I repeated the cover story. Close for years. Family circles overlapping. Hard times creating strong ties. He smiled. Not because he believed me. Because he had heard the lie and accepted its usefulness. That smile chilled me more than open contempt would have. It told me he knew this room was full of edited truths and preferred it that way. Sincerity was messy. Presentation was manageable. Around us, every laugh arrived with a function. Every pause carried rank. Some guests interrupted freely because they belonged. Others waited to be invited back into the current. My brother laughed hardest at the anchor's remarks, even when they were barely jokes. The fiancée spoke less than before. Twice I caught her looking at me with a question she could not ask in front of everyone. And slowly, as plates changed and wine deepened in the glasses, the hierarchy settled fully into place. There were people at that table whose presence added shine, and there were people whose presence had to be explained. I knew exactly which kind I was supposed to be. It started with a story about rain. That was all. The museum donor, halfway through her second glass of wine, began reminiscing about storms from her childhood. Summer blackouts, candlelight dinners, the romantic inconvenience of weather when you grow up in a house large enough to make inconvenience picturesque. Around the table, people offered their own polished memories. A flooded tennis court, a delayed trip to Provence, roof leak in an old family estate that later became a charming renovation project. Then the fiancé turned to my brother and asked, smiling, what rain had been like where he grew up. For a split second, his face emptied. Not fully, just enough for me to see the boy underneath the suit, the one who knew exactly what rain had meant in our house. Buckets under the ceiling, damp towels along the window frame, our father swearing softly in the dark when another patch failed, our mother moving the good lamp away from the wall before water reached the socket, mold climbing corners we pretended not to see, school shoes staying wet for days because there was no second pair. My brother laughed lightly. He said rain was rain, really. Then he turned it into something tidy, said we lived in a lively area where weather made people more communal, kids playing in the street, neighbors checking on each other. A little inconvenience, nothing dramatic. He smiled as if memory itself had become tasteful under his care. I felt the heat rise behind my ribs, because that was how he did it. Not with outright lies, not usually. He flattened, smoothed, pressed all the sharp edges of reality until hardship became atmosphere, something textured but harmless, something you could mention over roasted sea bass without making anyone lose appetite. The fiancée watched him closely this time. So you were close to your neighbors, she asked. Yes, he said too quickly. It was that kind of place. That kind of place. I almost looked away, because I knew what was coming next if the table kept drifting toward the past. Memory is dangerous when two people in the room share the original version. It resists editing. It carries smells, sounds, details no polished anecdote can completely hide. And once one true detail appears, the others begin pressing behind it. The anchor, carving his fish with careful precision, asked what my brother had wanted to be when he was younger. Another harmless question. Another knife wrapped in linen. My brother gave a practiced answer about ambition, curiosity, wanting to work in spaces where influence mattered. It sounded thoughtful, impressive, prepared. What it did not sound like was true. When he was younger, my brother had wanted stability more than prestige. He used to say he wanted a job where no one could fire you for getting sick. A job with a desk, a salary, and enough respect that our mother would stop apologizing when she met his teachers. Fame came later, so did polish, so did the hunger to never again be mistaken for where we came from. I should have stayed quiet. Instead, memory moved in me before caution could stop it. I remembered one night when we were 17 and 14. A storm had broken the power lines down the block. Our father was between jobs again. The landlord had already threatened to stop waiting for rent. My brother had an exam the next morning, one that could decide whether he got into the program he wanted. He was trying to study at the kitchen table by candlelight, jaw tight, one hand pressed against his temple. I had gone into our room, taken the old game console I had saved for over 2 birthdays, and sold it to the mechanic on the corner for almost nothing. With that money, plus what little I had hidden in a jar, I bought him the reference book he needed, and paid for a week at the library's late study access pass. I told him I had just gotten lucky with extra work. He knew I was lying. He took the envelope anyway. We never discussed it again. That exam helped change his life. Not alone. Nothing ever changes a life alone. But it mattered. And sitting at that table, listening to him explain himself as if he had climbed from pure will and refined mentorship, I could feel the weight of that old sacrifice pressing up through the years. Not because I wanted gratitude. I had never asked for that, but because every polished sentence he spoke now stood on top of things people like me had absorbed quietly for him. He moved through the world in a suit partly bought with hours I gave away. That truth sat in me like a lit coal. The lawyer asked my brother whether he had always seemed destined for more. My brother smiled modestly, the answer already forming. Before he could speak, I saw his eyes flick to me. Just once. Quick, sharp, warning. It said everything. Do not mention the apartment. Do not mention the bills. Do not mention how often ambition looks like hunger wearing borrowed clothes. He answered for himself, said he had been fortunate to encounter strong guidance early, said discipline had always mattered in our circles. Our circles, again with that phrase, so elegant, so bloodless. The fiancée put down her fork. You say our circles, she said gently, but I realize I don't actually know much about those early years. The room did not go silent, it thinned. Conversation at the far end dulled. Glass touched plate somewhere. My brother smiled, but it was brittle now. He started another revision, something about private family matters, humble beginnings, nothing unusual. He spoke as if he could still shepherd the past into a shape acceptable to the table. But I could feel the strain in the lie. It had begun to pull against itself. And once that happens, truth does not always need courage to enter. Sometimes it only needs one more ordinary question. The ordinary question never came because the anchor stepped in before it could. He did it smoothly, almost beautifully. He smiled at his daughter, lifted his glass slightly, and said that the details of humble beginnings were often overrated in formal settings. People, he added, had a tendency to romanticize struggle when what truly mattered was how successfully one had moved beyond it. A few guests chuckled, not because it was funny, because the room recognized an instruction when it heard one. Move on, refine the material, keep the evening clean. Then he looked at my brother and said with polished affection that one of his most admirable qualities was his instinct for self-presentation. He said it like praise, like character, like maturity, but under it I heard the machinery. Self-presentation, not integrity, not loyalty, not courage. Presentation. The arrangement of visible facts into something socially profitable. The fiancé did not laugh that time. Neither did I. The anchor continued, still smiling in that broadcast-ready way of his. He said everyone came from somewhere imperfect. The point, he said, was learning which details belonged in private and which ones needlessly complicated a family's public narrative. Public narrative. At an engagement dinner, he spoke about marriage the way corporations speak about mergers. There it was at last, naked in the candlelight, not family, branding. A warmth spread through the room, but it was not comfort, it was compliance. The lawyer nodded. The cabinet minister's wife made a soft approving noise. Even the museum donor smiled into her wine. I realized then how often cruelty survives simply by dressing itself in tasteful language. No slurs, no raised voice, no obvious insult. Just a series of elegant distinctions between what is presentable and what is not. Between lives that add polish and lives that create explanation. The anchor had mastered that language so well that everyone around him treated it as wisdom. I watched him more closely after that. Once you see the pattern, you cannot unsee it. He complimented one guest's son for having excellent instincts because the boy had chosen a discreet profession over a public artistic life. He praised another family for being careful with exposure after some private scandal had been kept out of the papers. He referred to a distant relative of someone at the table as unfortunate noise because of a messy divorce that had briefly trended online. Human beings became variables in his speech. Assets, risks, embarrassments to be managed before they interrupted the larger picture. And every time he spoke that way, my brother listened like a student hoping to pass. That was when something shifted in me. Until then, I had been focused on the insult, on my brother's request, on the humiliation of being smuggled into the room under false terms. But sitting there, hearing the anchor reduce people to optics with the ease of breathing, I understood the system surrounding the betrayal. My brother was not merely ashamed. He was apprenticed to shame, trained in it, rewarded for it. Every polished nod from that man taught the same lesson. Approval is conditional and the condition is obedience. Be useful, be elegant, be edited. And for a moment, against my own will, I felt sorry for him, because I could see the trap. If the anchor approved of you, doors opened. Careers brightened. Social legitimacy settled over you like expensive fabric. If he withheld approval, no official punishment followed. You just felt the room cool. Invitations thinned. Introductions slowed. Opportunities somehow found cleaner candidates. This was power in its most civilized form. No fingerprints. No scandal. Just selective warmth distributed to those who performed correctly. My brother wanted that warmth badly enough to put me in the cold. But pity is dangerous when mixed with anger. It can blur judgment. It can make surrender sound compassionate. So I forced myself to hold both truths at once. Yes, he was trapped in a system where approval was exchanged for obedience. Yes, the anchor's power was real. Yes, the fiancé had likely been raised inside this grammar of reputation until it felt as natural as breathing. But none of that made my brother innocent. The anchor had not invented him. He had only discovered a weakness already there. A hunger to rise so intense it could be turned against his own history. A fear of being seen as common so deep it made him volunteer the knife before anyone asked for blood. That was the part I could not excuse. Plenty of people enter cruel systems. Not all of them feed their families to it. Not all of them point at their own brother and say, quietly hide. Across the table, the fiancée seemed to be arriving at some version of this too. She looked at her father differently now, more carefully, not with rebellion exactly, but with recognition. As if she had suddenly noticed how many of his jokes were really judgments, how many compliments carried conditions, how often love in that house sounded like evaluation. When her gaze moved to my brother, it softened, then tightened. She was seeing his fear, maybe also his participation. The anchor asked me another question then, harmless on the surface. He wanted to know whether I found loyalty difficult to maintain across changing social circumstances. The phrasing was immaculate. The meaning was not. He was asking whether people like me understood our place once someone from our world moved upward. Did we cling? Did we embarrass? Did we know when to step back for the good of the larger picture? I held his gaze. In public, millions trusted that face to tell the truth. In private, he was asking if love could be made less visible when status required it. And beneath my anger, one question sharpened into something impossible to avoid. What destroys a family more completely? The powerful man who teaches others to be ashamed, or the son, the fiancé, the brother who agrees? The truth slipped out on a plate of dessert, not in some grand dramatic speech, not because I stood up and decided to burn the room down. It happened the way truth often does when people have spent too long arranging lies around it. A small mistake, a familiar object, one loose thread catching on everything at once. Staff had just cleared the main course. The candles burned lower now, making the silver look softer and faces look harder. A final course arrived on porcelain plates painted with a thin blue border. Pear tart, vanilla cream, something delicate enough to imply restraint. Conversation had thinned into smaller, more intimate currents. People were drinking more freely, which made them careless in subtle ways. The fiancée excused herself briefly and returned carrying a slim leather album. She smiled as she sat down. I found these upstairs, she said. I thought it might be nice. My brother went still, not dramatically, only enough for someone who knew him to notice. His hand stopped midway to his glass. His shoulders locked. A quick look flashed toward her, then toward her father, then across the table to me. In that instant I understood what he had seen before anyone else had. Photographs, not curated engagement photos, older ones. The kind families keep when they have not yet learned to be ashamed of what life looked like before polish. The fiancée opened the album with innocent enthusiasm at first. I could see she thought she was helping, humanizing the evening, making everyone feel warmer, more connected. The first pages were harmless enough. Her childhood, school awards, vacation houses, the anchor looking younger but already composed, one hand always resting where a camera could read authority. Then she turned a page and frowned slightly. These aren't mine, she said. My brother's chair made the faintest sound against the floor. The photo on the page was old, glossy at the edges, bent in one corner. Two boys standing in front of a weathered apartment building with plastic Halloween masks pushed up on their heads. One taller, trying to look tough. One smaller, grinning too wide. Their costumes were homemade. Their shoes were cheap. Their closeness was unmistakable, us. Before anyone spoke, my body recognized the picture before my mind did. I remembered the night. Rain threatening. Our mother sewing part of my costume by hand because we could not afford another. My brother calling me by the nickname only he used, telling me not to trip on the stairs. The smell of damp concrete. The way we had laughed at nothing because childhood still allowed that. The fiancé looked from the photo to my face, then to my brother, then back again. What a coincidence, the museum donor said lightly. He looked so much like, she stopped. Because now everyone saw it. The jaw, the eyes. The same stubborn line between the brows when trying not to react. Silence fell so fast it felt dropped, not the comfortable silence of people pausing to admire something, the airless kind, the kind that reveals a room was only stable as long as the script held. My brother reached for the album too quickly. Old neighborhood friend, he said, and even he heard how thin it sounded. He gave a short laugh. We practically grew up together. People used to joke we looked related. Nobody moved. The anchor did not blink. The fiancée kept her hand on the album. Then she turned the page. Another photograph. This one worse. A birthday in our kitchen. Streamers made from cut paper. A cake listing to one side. Me, maybe 10, with frosting on my sleeve. My brother behind me, one arm around my shoulders, leaning in with that protective expression older siblings get before life teaches them to manage their faces. On the back wall, partly visible, was our mother's handwriting on a banner. Happy birthday, little brother. The fiancé read it before anyone else could pretend not to. I saw the exact moment the room changed. The lawyer leaned back as if distance could protect him from discomfort. The cabinet minister's wife lowered her fork and did not touch it again. The museum donor looked down at her plate, suddenly fascinated by crust. The anchor's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened into something colder than anger. Not shock. Assessment. Damage calculation. His future son-in-law had not merely come from a less polished background. He had staged the evening on a false premise and involved everyone in the deception. My brother began talking before anyone asked him to. Too fast. He said it was complicated. He said we were close like family. He said in some communities, terms like brother were used loosely. He said there had been so much going on, so many introductions to manage, he had not wanted to overwhelm people with details that could be explained later. Each sentence made the next one worse. Half-truths breed panic. Panic breeds insult. The fiancée looked at him as if she no longer recognized the language coming out of his mouth. Then she turned to me. Not to him, to me. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. Is he your brother? Everything in the room seemed to hold itself still around that question. Candles flickered, glass reflected gold along the table. Somewhere in another part of the house, a door closed softly. My brother's eyes found mine, pleading now, not commanding, not warning, begging. He was asking me one last time to help him keep the structure standing. I could have stayed quiet. I could have let him talk until the lie collapsed under its own weight. I could have offered some softer version, some language merciful enough to save him from the full humiliation he had prepared for me. Instead, I put down my fork, looked directly at her, and chose the only thing in that house that still belonged fully to me. The truth. Yes, I said. He's my brother. No one spoke, so I kept going. We grew up in the same house, same parents, same neighborhood he's been trying very hard not to mention. My brother whispered my name then, not the polished one, the real one. And just like that, every lie at the table lost control of its own face. My name sounded different in his mouth when he said it like that. Not refined, not managed, just frightened. For 1 second I saw the brother I had lost flicker through the man sitting across from me. Then the room reclaimed him, his spine straightened, his face tightened. He looked first to his fiancée, then to her father, as if checking where survival now required him to stand. Let me explain, he said. It was the worst possible sentence, not because explanations are always false, but because some moments reveal too much for framing to save them. The fiancée closed the album slowly. Her hands were steady, but her expression was not. The glow she had worn all evening was gone. In its place was something far more honest. Hurt, yes, but also clarity. The kind that arrives when a person realizes they have not just been lied to, but recruited into a lie. You told me he was an old family friend. She said. My brother swallowed. He is close to the family. He is the family. No one at the table interrupted her. The anchor finally set down his glass, carefully, soundlessly. That silence was more threatening than if he had slammed it. He looked at my brother with the kind of contained disappointment powerful men cultivate because it punishes without exposing them. This is not a misunderstanding, he said. This is misrepresentation. There was that language again, not heartbreak, not cruelty, not shame, misrepresentation. As if the greatest injury in the room was to the event's coherence. I turned to my brother before he could answer him. Tell them why, I said. He looked at me like I had asked him to strip in public. Don't do this, he whispered. Do what? Say out loud what you already said to me on the phone. His fiancée's head moved slightly. What phone call? He shut his eyes for a moment, and I knew then he had run out of exits. I should tell you I stayed calm and precise. I did not. Years of swallowed things were pushing up now, and once pain begins speaking in its own voice, it does not care much about elegance. You invited me here, I said, looking at all of them now, but not as your brother. You asked me to come as a family friend, or staff if that made things easier. You told me not to mention our parents, not to mention where we grew up, not to tell any stories that made your life look less polished. The museum donor stared openly now. The lawyer looked offended on behalf of decorum. The cabinet minister's wife lowered her eyes the way people do when they know something ugly has become undeniable. My brother's face went pale. It wasn't like that. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because disbelief needed somewhere to go. Then what was it like? He started talking fast, tripping over his own panic. He said he had been trying to protect the evening. He said her father valued discretion. He said first impressions, in these circles, mattered. He said he had not wanted our family to be judged unfairly. He said he only needed time before explaining properly. Always later, always properly. Truth in his version was forever scheduled for a safer day. That was when I said the thing that had been burning in me since the call. I was never ashamed of where we came from. My voice surprised even me. It came out low and hard. I was ashamed tonight because my own brother treated me like evidence that needed hiding. That landed. The fiancé looked at him as if something essential had broken. Not just trust, admiration. The image she had of him as disciplined, composed, self-made. Now she could see the cost of that composition sitting at the table in front of her breathing. "It's not poverty that bothers you," I said to him. "It's witness. I know what your life actually was. I know who paid what. I know who stayed when things were ugly. I know how much of your polished story was built, with other people carrying weight for you. And you could have brought me here as your brother, you chose not to." He stood up so abruptly his chair struck the floor. "I chose survival," he snapped. There it was. The first honest sentence from him all night. The anchor's expression changed almost imperceptibly, not because he was surprised but because the private logic of his world had just been spoken too plainly. Survival, approval, placement. Everyone at the table understood suddenly what had been operating underneath the evening all along. My brother looked at his fiancée then, desperate. "You don't understand what this is." Like for me, she stood too. "No," she said, and her voice shook. "I don't think I did. I thought you were careful. I thought you were private. I didn't know you were willing to erase your own brother to make my family more comfortable." The anchor cut in with practiced control. "Let's not dramatize this." She turned on him so quickly that even he seemed momentarily unprepared. "No," she said. "That's exactly the problem. Everything in this house gets reduced until it sounds acceptable." For the first time all evening, the room belonged to someone truth had reached in time. She looked at her father with wet, furious eyes. "You talk about people like they are risks to be managed. Optics, narrative, exposure, and now I'm supposed to sit here and pretend this isn't what that teaches people to do." The anchor did not answer immediately. Men like him are dangerous because they know silence can also be a weapon. But the weapon was failing now. Too much had been named. My brother stood between us all, breathing hard, stripped of polish at last. No script left. No smooth transition. Just a choice. The table or blood, approval or truth. And for one long shaking second, I honestly did not know which one he would choose. In the end, I did not wait to hear his answer. Maybe that sounds cowardly. Maybe some people would call it unfinished. But there are moments when staying becomes another form of begging, and I had begged enough for one night without using the word. I looked at my brother standing there between the family he was trying to enter and the family he had tried to erase, and I realized something simple. If he did choose me now, after exposure had made it necessary, it would not heal what had already been revealed. Truth dragged into daylight under pressure is still truth, and some dignity only returns when you stop asking for recognition from people who watched you disappear. So I stood. The room shifted again, not with scandal this time, but with that nervous social recalculation people do when they sense the evening has broken beyond repair. Chairs moved softly. No one tried to restart conversation. The candles kept burning with obscene calm. I placed my napkin beside the plate, not on it. A small thing, but it mattered to me. I would not leave looking dismissed. I would leave having decided to go. My brother said my name again. I did not turn immediately. That pause was for me. For the years I had answered too fast. When I finally looked at him, his face had changed. The panic was still there, but beneath it was something rawer. Shame, maybe, or the first true sight of himself in a room where his excuses had stopped working. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then glanced toward the anchor. That reflex told me everything I needed to know, not because he chose the other man in words, because even now he checked the room before checking his own heart. "I have to go," I said, not loud, not dramatic, just final. No one stopped me at first. That was revealing in its own way. The lawyer looked down. The museum donor adjusted her bracelet. The cabinet minister's wife wore an expression I have seen on many comfortable people over the years, a look that says I disapprove of what happened but not enough to risk my place by intervening. Silence has dialects. That one spoke clearly. The anchor remained seated. He did not apologize. Of course he did not. Men who think in terms of narrative rarely apologize for the pain required to maintain one. He only said, in a voice calm enough to chill the room further, that emotions were high and that unfortunate scenes often emerged when private boundaries had not been handled properly. Even then he could not call me what I was. A brother, a son of the same house, a human being wronged. No, I was a scene, an unfortunate result of poor management. The fiancée was the only one who looked truly stricken, not embarrassed, awake. She came around the table as I reached the hall. "I'm sorry," she said, and there was no polish left in it. I didn't know. I should have asked more. I should have noticed. I believed that she was sorry, which surprised me. I also knew her apology could not touch the center of the wound. "This wasn't yours to fix," I told her. Her eyes moved past me to where my brother had not yet followed. That hesitation hurt her too. I saw then that whatever future she had imagined for this engagement had split open tonight. Not only because of his lie, but because of what it revealed about the air she had been breathing all her life. Her father's world, her own instincts, the difference between elegance and decency. Behind us, chairs scraped. At last, my brother came into the hall. He looked smaller there than he had at the table. Without the room to perform for, his suit seemed suddenly too tight, like he had borrowed a life tailored for someone with less history. He started with another explanation. I stopped him with a look. For once, he understood. I didn't mean to hurt you, he said. That sentence is a refuge for people who benefit from what they meant enough to do anyway. I know, I said, you just meant to hide me. He flinched. Good, some truths should land where they belong. Then I took my coat from the staff member who had greeted me at the door. Even she looked different now. Less polished, more human, or maybe that was me. Maybe once humiliation leaves your bloodstream, you start seeing everyone more clearly. Outside, the night air hit cold and clean. I breathed like someone surfacing. Gravel crunched under my shoes. Behind me, the front door remained open for a few seconds, spilling gold light across the drive before closing again. A beautiful house swallowing its own silence. I walked to the gate instead of calling a car immediately. I needed the distance. With every step, the humiliation loosened its grip and changed shape into something firmer. Not relief exactly. Relief is too light. This was heavier than that, but steadier. The knowledge that I had stayed long enough to be seen and left before I let them rename me again. The knowledge that dignity does not always look triumphant. Sometimes it looks like refusing one more compromise with your own disappearance. My brother did not follow me beyond the drive. That mattered too. It meant he was still inside in every sense. Still among the candles and polished language and the father whose approval had become a mirror he could not stop staring into. But the night had cracked something. In him, in his fiancée. Maybe even in that house. We did not speak for a while after that. Not days. Weeks. Distance settled between us like winter in an old apartment, getting into everything. And yet, somewhere beneath the anger, I sensed the story between us was not finished. Damaged, yes. Possibly changed forever. But not finished. Because sometimes the first honest step in a broken family is not reconciliation. It is finally walking away upright. For a long time after that night, I kept replaying one question in my mind. What exactly had my brother been trying to escape? Poverty? Embarrassment? The memory of being looked down on? Or the deeper terror that no matter how far he climbed, someone might still recognize the boy he used to be? I think the answer is all of it. And that is what makes stories like this so painful. They are not only about cruelty, they are about fear. Fear dressed in good manners. Fear hidden inside ambition. Fear taught so early and so thoroughly that people begin confusing acceptance with safety, polish with worth, and approval with love. When that happens, the people who loved you before you had status become dangerous for one simple reason. They remember you unedited. That is the real threat, not the poor neighborhood, not the imperfect parents, not the awkward stories. Memory, witness. The people who saw what it cost to become who you are. My brother did not try to hide me because I had done something shameful. He tried to hide me because I carried proof that his polished life did not begin in polished rooms. I knew the unpaid bills, the cracked walls, the shared sacrifices, the hidden help. I knew how many quiet acts of love had held up his future long before powerful people began calling him promising. And that is true in more families than people admit. There are always invisible architects behind someone's success. The sibling who worked instead of studied. The parent who lied and said they had eaten already. The aunt who watched the kids for free. The brother who covered a bill and never mentioned it again. The grandmother who stayed in a bad apartment so the younger ones could move somewhere better. The family member who absorbed the humiliation while someone else built a cleaner story on top of it. Then, too often, the world congratulates the finished product and never asks who paid for the scaffolding. That is why class shame can be so destructive. It does not just make people dislike where they came from. It teaches them to resent anyone who reflects it back. Respectability politics works the same way. It whispers that if you dress correctly, speak correctly, date correctly, soften your history, and remove the wrong people from the frame, then maybe the gatekeepers will let you in. Maybe they will call you refined. Maybe they will forget your beginnings. But there is a cost. There is always a cost. Sometimes it is your voice. Sometimes it is your honesty. Sometimes it is the people who carried you when you had nothing else. And the tragic part is this. Even after all that performance, the powerful still do not love you the way your family once did. They evaluate you. They reward you. They may even admire you. But admiration is not the same as loyalty. Access is not the same as belonging. And a seat at the right table means very little if you had to cut your own blood out of the picture to earn it. As for forgiveness, I still think about that too. Can you forgive someone who hides you to elevate themselves? Maybe, but I do not think forgiveness starts with minimizing what happened. It starts with naming it clearly. Not he was under pressure. Not he meant well. Not those people are just different. No, he hid me. He was ashamed to be seen with the truth of his own life. He asked me to participate in my own erasure. Only when the wound is spoken plainly can healing even begin to approach it. And even then, forgiveness is not guaranteed. Some betrayals change the architecture of a relationship forever. Some people come back wiser. Some never do. What I know now is this. Family is not proven by blood alone. It is proven by whether someone claims you when claiming you costs them something. It is easy to love people in private. It is easy to speak warmly when no one important is watching. The real test comes when status enters the room, when class enters the room, when power enters the room, when a person must choose between being admired upward and being loyal backward. That is where character shows itself. So I want to ask you something. If someone you loved invited you into a room but asked you not to come as who you really are, what would you do? Would you go? Would you expose the lie? Would you leave the moment the conditions were spoken? And if you were in my place, could you forgive a brother for treating you like a liability instead of family? Tell me in the comments. I really want to hear your thoughts, especially if you have lived through class shame, family betrayal, respectability politics, or the quiet pressure to hide where you come from. If this story hit you somewhere personal, share it. Someone reading your comment may realize they are not alone. And if you believe stories like this matter, take 1 second to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. We tell emotionally charged stories about family, power, betrayal, dignity, and the moments that change people forever. And if you're not done yet, watch the next video. Because sometimes the hardest betrayals do not come from enemies. They come from the people who know exactly what you survived.